This is a response to pyrrho314 and your video there, Consciousnessreport, Pyrrho. Firstly, thanks very much for making such a thorough response to my videos. It is nice to continue this conversation, and I don't regard it as a spat, which someone described it as in the comment. I've made notes, look, I'm out in the field with notes, it's fantastic. Okay, 4 points. Firstly, solipsism. You talk about solipsism elsewhere in the video. I haven't got time to look at that yet, but I will. But you're kind of referring to solipsism in this video as well. Talking about consciousness is ultimately a subjective experience which can't be applied. I think you say that you can't extend that subjective feeling to other people. It's subjective. Yeah, okay, fine, but it's a dead end, isn't it? You know, philosophically and practically, it's a dead end. If you're going to say that, then I have no point in talking. There's no point in talking to you either right now. I'm going to forget that. And it's practically a dead end as well. You know, if I was to say that, yeah, this headache I've got, I haven't got a headache. But if I had a headache, I would say, yeah, I have headaches, but no one else in the world has headaches. I have no way of guaranteeing from my solipsistic position that anybody else has headaches. Why would I invent analgesics? You know, clearly not. So solipsism is a dead end, both practically and philosophically, I think. And you're not really solipsistic most of the times, although you say you are. A lot of the things you say clearly are not solipsistic. Because if you were really saying that ultimately the only thing we know is consciousness ourselves, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because you wouldn't be attributing consciousness to all the other things that you've attributed it to, or you've suggested, or you've hinted that this green stuff here might have some kind of rudimentary consciousness. So no, it's not. I just don't think it goes anywhere. You know, if you want to stay with solipsism, that's fine, but I just don't think it goes anywhere. I think we're much more in the territory of talking about the intersubjective, because that's the only thing we can talk about, or the hetero-phenomenological, as Derek calls it. You know, yes, we take first-person subjective opinion into account, but we also talk about all the other things that we can talk about which support or conflict with that account. So it's just one of a range of strategies to arrive at truth. Yeah. And I don't really believe solipsists, quite honestly. I think if you've got a lot of solipsists, let's say you've got 2 solipsists, let's say you're an ideal solipsist, Pyrrho, and that you firmly believe that only yourself is conscious and everything else is not. If you get you and another solipsist together, both of whom are testing that they have both got that they're the only game in town, and the experimenter and everybody else is some kind of projection of their own imagination. If you get those 2 people and stick them both in fMRI machines and stick pins into them both and see what they do, and shine various wavelengths of light into their eyes and ask them to report on what colour they're seeing, you will get stability. You will get stable results from those experiments. You will get intersubjective information, stable, universal, something like universal objective truths, even about solipsism. So it's you know, realistically, that's what we're talking about, isn't it? We really can't just collapse a conversation into I don't really know you're awake. It's not going to go anywhere, that. So let's not bother with solipsism, alright? Second thing, essentialism. Yeah, I do think you are an essentialist in some ways. I mean, I think a lot of us, including myself, slip essentialism into the back door when we don't intend to. And I think consciousness is one of the ways in which we do that. The phrase that jumps out at me is, you talk about consciousness as a feature of a system. You say, I'm not an essentialist, I'm a systems thinker, and consciousness is a feature of a system. But then you go on to attribute consciousness to systems which have none of the mechanism, the attributes, the component parts, the stuff that those systems have that we know have consciousness, including you. Even the most rigid solipsist, I think, would have to say, the reason, well, they would have good reason to say, I am a solipsistic, I believe that I'm the only person with consciousness because I have the mechanism to support that. You know, unless you're some kind of theist. I am the only conscious game in town and I have the mechanism to support it. You know, even if you're looking around at other systems which don't match your solipsistic system, then the only way you could attribute consciousness or identify it as a feature of that system is by taking it as an essence. Yeah, that's what I mean by that. Let me just see what I've written. If you're attributing this feature, that's consciousness, to systems which don't contain the appropriate mechanism, then you're sneaking essentialism in by the back door. Now you'll probably say, but it does contain the essential mechanisms. It does, plants for example, do contain some kind of sensory organs, let's call them. They do have something that corresponds to memory, let's say. They are able to process information in certain ways. Let's say that those are the systems you're talking about. Well, see my other video on radial categories. I would draw the line of consciousness way beyond that. You might draw it way after that, doesn't matter. It still demonstrates that we're talking about a radial category, which is not good if you're trying to pin things down. Alright, so that's essentialism. You're an essentialist, essentially. Okay, definition of consciousness. Ooh, God, yeah, whoa, foot in mouth here. You're talking about consciousness and the difficulty of definitions, talking a little bit about breaking it down, and you say this, and I'm putting together bits from two sentences that are consecutive here. You say that consciousness is a feeling, or in the next sentence, a sensation of personal agency. Now, if you're using that as a definition, which you kind of do in this bit, consciousness is either a feeling or a sensation of personal agency, then right there we've got problems. If you're talking about feeling, then you're talking about, firstly, a somatosensory system, because that's what feelings are, or if you're talking about it more broadly, then you're talking about metaphors of somatosensory system operation, which requires a whole different system. I've got a somatosensory system, my dog has a somatosensory system, you've got a somatosensory system, grass doesn't, trees don't. I don't think my dog has the secondary processing power to turn those into metaphors either, so we can use feeling in that way. So if you're using the word feeling, right there you've consigned yourself to quite a narrow definition of consciousness, which excludes almost everything you've talked about so far. It's a feeling of personal agency. Person, my God, if you're going to use personal I would say is at minimum, a map or a representation of bodily states. Again, that's Damasio, but Thomas Metzinger, other people have talked about this. At minimum, the only way that person makes sense is as some kind of representation or map of somatic systems. I've got one of those, Phoebe's got one of those, I think a cockroach has got one of those. Grass doesn't have it, trees don't have it, they haven't got that kind of system in place. So feeling, personal, agency, even worse. Agency requires not only a somatosensory system to do the feeling thing, not only some kind of map or representation of bodily somatic states to form the proto-self that will ultimately be a person, it also requires those things to be linked up to a sensory motor system, which allows for projection into the future, which allows for simulations of potential futures, which allows a sense of agency to go through that process that we might call making a decision about which of those futures to step into. So, you know, by the time you got to the end of that sentence, you pretty much restricted it to humans. A feeling of personal agency, because I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that only humans have this feeling of person and agency. Bit of a problem there. Okay, then you asked the last bit, you asked for the cut-off point of consciousness. Is it a dog? Is it a bee? Yeah, radial categories, as you know by now, I hope, don't have cut-off points. They consist of elements which are drawn together from a whole range of different properties and features. You know, consciousness, I would say, consists of things like memory, sensory engagement, self-other relations, a whole range of them, you know, language, all that kind of stuff, the prototypical understanding of consciousness, and indeed the ultimately prototypical, I would include subjective experience of those things, but it's only one feature of amongst a whole panoply of different features. And they go out a long way. These things go out as radial arms. They don't form cut-off points where, you know, one side of the line is those things are conscious and the other side of the line is those things that aren't. These things are like chords, you know what I mean? Some of the notes drop off and different notes are played, but yeah, it's a one-note samba that's being played out there amongst those trees and those grass. One-note samba, and Phoebe's got different notes playing in her consciousness because she has an olfactory sense that I can only dream about. So yeah, those are the problems I have with that video. It's good stuff, you know, don't get me wrong, it's interesting stuff. But I think on those four counts, I would have problems with them. Solipsism, essentialism, your definition of consciousness, which is self-contradictory, and any notion of a cut-off point is meaningless in radial categories. Sorry about the wind, it wasn't windy when I set up, but now it really is. I'll just leave the wind rippling in this beautifully, almost intelligent way across this field. Georgia.